Oh man, I am so tired from all the work I did on that last video. And now I've got to do even more work. I've got to go actually research and find all of the atheists' greatest fails. And that just takes a lot of digging. I mean, if only there was some channel that would actually go and compile all of atheism's greatest fails into nice, convenient compilation videos. Then I could respond to a whole bunch of them at once without having to actually go dig up each little clip. Well, unfortunately there isn't any channel like that around, so I guess I'll look up videos about science, because science is fun. Learning is fun. Oh, look at this. There's a channel called ScienceNET, and it seems to be about science literacy. Why, I could use some science literacy. I ain't never learned about the science. I'ma get me some science learnin's. Hey, wait a minute. These videos aren't about science. Wow. Are you guys just totally not aware of how much that looks exactly like what some crappy pro-religious channel would do? You know things are bad when the Christian on YouTube is the one who has an intro that's 70s rock and roll, and the atheists have an intro that's like, heavenly choirs are going to tell you to convert to atheism.
I'm arguing for a certain kind of intolerance. There's no way around that.
I agree.
But it's not the kind of intolerance that gave us the gulag or that would put people in prison for their religious beliefs.
Yeah, it is.
I'm arguing for just new rules of conversation. We can call it conversational intolerance, where, if I came on your show and said the Holocaust never happened, I would immediately feel pressure from you to justify that claim, or you would marginalize me immediately as someone who just could not be trusted, at least on European history. But if I come on your show and say that I'm in dialogue with the creator of the universe, or if I know a cracker literally becomes the body of Jesus if you say the right Latin words over it, you have to give me a pass. It's taboo to criticize that, and that's really what I'm challenging in my book.
You're trying to tell us that criticizing religion is taboo in our society, while you yourself are criticizing religion on national television. Think about the logic.
Well, there's not sufficient evidence for, certainly not for a personal God, and certainly there's no evidence that he wrote any of our books. And we have to realize that we are in a situation where people are flying planes into our buildings because they think God wrote their book and that they're going to get to paradise by dying in the right circumstances. And it seems to me a point of really exquisite obviousness that the response to this situation cannot be, sorry guys, God wrote our book and you're going to hell for your actions.
Right, because instead our response needs to be to flaunt the degeneracy of contemporary secularism. That's gonna convince the Middle East that we're to be trusted with completely changing their society.
One of the arguments against science from the religious side of things is that science assumes from the start there is no supernatural realm or there's perfect regularity among the laws of nature, but that's simply not true. A scientist, if they were faced with something that was manifestly supernatural or a deviation from the regularities we observed in nature, we would try to understand that. We would not say, I just can't deal with that, I don't know what to do. We would approach it using the methods of science. The only assumption that science makes is that the world is not trying to trick us, that we are not a brain in a vat being taunted by a mad scientist, that we can more or less trust our sensory data, and we look for patterns in that data. Could there be miracles? Of course there could be, but you're faced with two worldviews, one of which that says that those eyewitness testimonies that Dinesh mentions of people who are regressing to past lives are mistaken. The other worldview says that all of the laws of physics that we think we know are wrong. And that's the choice you need to make.
Yeah, because that's what supernaturalists think. Supernaturalists think that all of the laws of physics we've discovered are simply wrong, and that's a completely fair and unbiased summary of their philosophical views. It's not like that's the straw man fallacy or anything.
Religion has usurped this notion of morality, so that if you just saying, I don't buy it, automatically is equivalent to the saying, I'm not a good person. And that, to me, is the underlying most immoral aspect of religion. It tries to have a monopoly on morality and ethics.
Well, religious people, in fact, do have an almost total monopoly on morality and ethics. The only exception would be a group called Secular Pro-Life, assuming you don't think that it's actually some kind of Catholic conspiracy. Assuming that the secularists within it are actual secularists and not some kind of Catholic plants, then Secular Pro-Life would be pretty much the only serious contender to religious people on having morality and ethics. If you want to convince us that atheists and secularists in general actually have morality and ethics, then you're going to have to step up to the plate and actually adopt some actual ethics that's about something other than letting you do whatever it is you wanted to do anyway and bashing other people's values. Those seem to be the only two roles that ethics ever actually has for atheists and secularists in general. It is certainly possible for atheists to have ethics. I mean, Raoul Wallenberg. But most of you people are no Raoul Wallenberg, that's for sure. Atheistic attempts at constructing ethics never seem to require one to say no to self. They never specify that there are times that you have to take the road less traveled, that there are times you have to prefer virtue to pleasure, and above all, that killing babies is wrong.
So they did a further study, and they questioned people who claimed the Christian box. They said, do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe in transubstantiation? Do you believe this? No. Why do you call yourself Christian? Because I like to think of myself as a good person. And I think most people call themselves Christians because they think if they don't, they'll be labeled as bad people.
From a genuinely Christian perspective, people who call themselves Christians only because they want to be perceived as a good person and don't actually believe any of the doctrines are saboteurs. We'd just as soon be rid of them. If all such people would start calling themselves atheists, then there would be a lot less confusion in the world, and Christianity would be rid of a lot of its problems. The trouble is that instead of leaving to start calling themselves atheists like an honest person would do when they've concluded that the doctrines of their religion are not true, these people instead start to take over churches and make them, quote, liberal, quote, in their, quote, theology, unquote. This actually does a lot more damage to Christianity than anything the people who actually call themselves atheists have been up to. As far as I'm concerned, quote, liberal, unquote, quote, theology, unquote, is a cancer that kills everything it touches, and anyone who believes in it, I would just ask, will you please convert to Islam and destroy Islam for us, but leave Christianity alone?
I wrote a logic textbook. Does that make logic man-made?
Logic is man-made, yes.
Yeah. So there's no reason to follow it then.
Hitchens and whoever this other guy is are talking at cross purposes. The question before them is whether logic is discovered or invented. If it's discovered, then we pretty much have to conform to it or we're wrong. If it's discovered, then it's possible to be wrong about it. But if it's only invented, then it can be whatever we want it to be. There are no real rules, there's just whatever we happen to want, and there's no reason to prefer anybody's rules over anybody else's. Now, trust me on this one, atheists. You do not want to convince people that logic is invented rather than discovered. But that's what this religious apologist guy has just caught Hitchens doing.
If you were a serious spiritual person, wouldn't you think it was a bit much that someone said they could come before you and tell you what God wanted?
Yeah, because Christopher Hitchens is a deeply spiritual person, and he's in a position to be giving advice to deeply spiritual people.
I've talked about the fact that when I criticize the Muslim world and say this is a religion that is different than every other religion, liberals who I don't think follow this that closely, maybe they are now with ISIS, they get mad at me because they think I'm being bigoted toward a minority, which is ridiculous. But I've made the point that if this was the 16th century or the 14th century, I'd be talking about how Christianity is the religion that is way too violent, because that was the age, the 14th century, of the Inquisition and all the lovely things.
They
like
hated
that.
my people.
Burning
they hated my people for a long
Jews,
time.
yes.
Yes.
Burning witches at the stake.
Yes.
And the 16th century was the age when Protestants and Catholics, which were the Shiites and the Sunnis of that era in that religion, were slaughtering each other the entire century all across the continent. But the Western world came out of that period. And
My own religion of Latter-day Saintism comes with an explanation for that. It's called the doctrine of the Great Apostasy.
we don't do that now. The Islamic world has not come out of that period, and that's why I'm a little more concerned with them than I am, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right.
And I hope that people are starting to get that idea in their head, that all religions are not alike.
So the bottom line is that I think Bill Maher is actually making a really good point here. He doesn't even try to construct some kind of absurd narrative that somehow atheism or the Enlightenment is responsible for this change in Christianity. He simply acknowledges that some change has occurred, which it has. The only real problem with what he's saying is that he seems to be rhetorically grouping what might be called primitive Christianity or Christianity as it was originally intended by Christ and St. Paul and so forth with this later warring and so forth. Those two things are, I think, not connected at all.
Mother Teresa, endlessly praised for work that most of the time she actually never did. I went to watch her very closely in Calcutta. You don't mind that she thinks that what Bengal and Calcutta mainly needs is a campaign, a clerical campaign, against birth control and family planning. Has anyone here ever been to Bengal and concluded that's what it really needs? That's what she was really campaigning for, in case you're worried. But never mind, she gives a wonderful impression of being a charitable person. So what Indians need is more missionaries to cure poverty.
I think that the caste system in India was actually a major contributor to perpetuating the massive poverty in India. And I think that the caste system was caused by the Hindu religion. And so if we assume that our goal is to make India more prosperous and get rid of the caste system, then it would seem to make sense to replace the Hindu religion with another religion that doesn't have that kind of caste system and actually does tend more towards prosperity in the modern world, i.e., Christianity. And which doesn't blow people up like Islam and doesn't have people become completely disconnected from reality like Buddhism, but which is pretty grounded and actually teaches that you should help other people regardless of their social status.
When everybody knows there's only one cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women, which means giving them some control over their reproduction.
Yeah, feminism's gonna cause prosperity. Instead of using sex as a way to motivate men to actually become fathers and go to work every day, we're instead going to give sex away for free and then make the women work so that they can't actually be spending time raising children. And then if they end up getting pregnant, we'll just kill all the babies. And that's going to bring us to prosperity. We're not going to use providing for family as a motivator. Instead, we're going to expect everyone to transform into these Ayn Rand super people. Yeah.
They seem to be in their Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have people who would like to return to the Middle Ages. I noticed they have 7th century ideals about beheadings and women and lots of free speech, and yet they're perfectly okay to use 21st century technology. I think you have to pick. If you say the word faith, which is what Hobby Lobby basically said, this is our faith, everything stops. Everybody just throws logic out the window and puts that at the head of the class.
This is a case in which the government is trying to force Hobby Lobby to do something that is against the owner's conscience and in clear violation of the First Amendment. This is totalitarianism, and if you are defending the government here, then that makes you a fascist.
And nobody ever really says what I keep trying to say, which is faith. It just means that's my opinion. That's your opinion. Your faith is an opinion. I think it's a particularly stupid opinion. I've never understand why faith is good. People say the word faith and everybody just backs off. Just tell me why the purposeful suspension of critical thinking, which is faith, why that's a good thing. Why is this a good thing when you go, you know what? I'm not even going to apply logic to this situation. How about that?
I would call this a straw man, but there have been people who've actually advocated something like this. I think Soren Kierkegaard seemed to. And this existentialist view of faith is pretty much directly against how the whole rest of the Christian world would define it, not to mention Latter-day Saints like myself.
You give people who make this case that that was the beginning and that there had to be something that provoked the beginning, do you give them an A at least for trying to reconcile faith and reason?
I don't think they're reconcilable.
Oh my god, it's Black Science Man! He's the trigger nigger of the new atheist crew, the black man with a gun who's doing drive-bys on religion every day. Everybody loves Black Science Man. He's following in the footsteps of Carl Sagan, another talking head that used to emerge from the idiot box. Let's hear my nigga drop some science, yo!
What do you mean?
Well, so let me say that differently. All efforts that have been invested by brilliant people of the past have failed at that exercise. They just fail. And so the track record is so poor that going forward I have essentially zero confidence, near zero confidence, that there will be fruitful things to emerge from the effort to reconcile them.
Word. My homeboy Black Science Man be breaking it down that there ain't no way to reconcile faith and reason. There's a name for that. It's called atheism, biatches. Atheism is true because atheism is true, my niggas.
So, for example, if you knew nothing about science and you read, say, the Bible, the Old Testament, which in Genesis is an account of nature. That's what that is. And I said to you, give me your description of the natural world based only on this. You would say the world was created in 6 days and that stars are just little points of light, much lesser than the sun. And in fact, they can fall out of the sky, right? Because that's what happens during the Revelation. One of the signs that the second coming is that the stars will fall out of the sky and land on Earth. To even write that means you don't know what those things are. You have no concept of what the actual universe is.
Atheist gangsta! The Bible isn't telling us that miracles happened. It's telling us about all the normal stuff that happens all the time because people didn't know what happens normally and they needed the Bible to tell them about that. Black Science Man got mad metaphysical skills. He just shanked religion straight up.
The Islamic culture rose at other times later. And in those other times, science and engineering discoveries were not a part of it. So we asked, why not? You got the cultural heritage, why doesn't it show up again? And then you got to dig a little deeper from the sacking of Baghdad and you find out there was a Muslim cleric, Al-Ghazali was his name, who was to Islam what St. Augustine was to Christianity.
Okay, I can't do the gangsta voice for this one. The reason Black Science Man wants to associate St. Augustine with Al-Ghazali is in order to advance the atheist narrative that St. Augustine was against mathematics, when in reality, St. Augustine was a Platonist, which means he loved mathematics and he was against numerology, just like Black Science Man. By the way, if you're offended at my using a funny voice and some ghetto lingo to talk about Black Science Man just because he's black and on television, then you need to rethink your life. Get over it. We've had enough of racial division. It is time to desensitize people completely to the whole idea of race. Because oversensitivity is our problem. Me, I'm an equal opportunity racist. I hate everybody equally.
Fundamentalists have actually read the books, and they're right about them. These books are every bit as intolerant, every bit as divisive as the Osama bin Ladens of the world or the Jerry Falwells of the world suggest. And I'm not necessarily equating the two of them in moral terms.
I don't mean to do exactly what I totally just did.
Once we dignify those claims, we are really hostage to their contents. I mean, the creator of the universe does hate homosexuals. If you read the Bible, at the very least, homosexual men, gay sex, is an abomination. It is spelled out in Leviticus. This edict is ramified in Romans. You can take Jesus and half his moods and get some really beautiful ethical precepts like the Golden Rule. But Jesus also said things like in Luke 19, anyone who doesn't want me to reign over him, bring him before me and slay him before me.
In context, Jesus is prophesying that something will happen at the end of the world. He is not giving an instruction to his followers to actually get up and go find his enemies. The Bible is not the Quran.
Okay? I guarantee you that the inquisitors of the Middle Ages, who were burning heretics alive for 5 solid centuries, they had read the whole New Testament. They had read the Sermon on the Mount. They found some way to square their behavior with the ministry of Jesus.
You see, I'm not actually a very good Christian, because I hate everybody. But a good Christian is supposed to love everybody. But a good Christian is not supposed to love what everybody does. According to Christian ethics, homosexuality is not part of who you are. It is instead a thing that you do. The motto of Christian ethics is to hate the sin, but love the sinner. And this is not just some empty, meaningless phrase. You can actually confront Christians with this and say, hey, wait a minute, I understand you're supposed to hate the sin, but aren't you really hating the sinner here? And that will, if they're actually following Christianity, get them to pause and reconsider what they're doing. This is not some advanced, esoteric, obscure theological concept only argued about by philosophers of metaphysics, like some of the finer points of the Trinity. No, this is obvious stuff that all Christians believe. And it's basic knowledge about the world that Christians believe this. This is why we've got to teach the Bible in schools, because people are so ignorant of basic facts like this. Well, I guess I've found a rich source of material to make response videos to in ScienceNET, because it doesn't look like they're going to be realizing that science involves a lot more than just bashing religion and occasionally bashing Fox News anytime soon.